I knew Feed Me Seymour before I was like paying attention to Broadway plays. Like my parents quoted it because they like saw the movie or saw the play, and so I would run around saying the line and just knew nothing about the play itself. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I am Jackson Nikolai.
I am Jacob Mann Christensen. We are delighted to be back early in the new season of No Script with so many scripts on the horizon to discuss.
True. Yes. Season 9, I believe, is what we're on right now. And so far, and as of today, it's still this season of musicals.
That's right.
Don't worry, we won't do musicals the whole season, but these first two conversations we've had this season have been about musicals and prominent musicals of the 1980s. The first one last week was about Sunday in the Park with George, and this week we are talking about Little Shop of Horrors by Alan Menken and Howard Ashman.
Yeah, we kind of hit early in this season, like two of the major musical figures, at least of the 20th century American theater scene. Stephen Sondheim and Alan Menken are like two of the big names. Obviously, Sondheim more than Menken, but Menken's one of those names that is huge in influencing, especially he goes on to do a bunch of the Disney musicals that are, so define the American theater.
Right, absolutely. So like right in that time of musicals, you have I'm blanking. I'll find it in a second. Sondheim, there we go. Sondheim writing musicals, like big impactful musicals for the stage. Menken is doing the same, but Menken like kind of reboots the Hollywood film musicals by working with Disney, certainly, but also by the film adaptation of the play that we're talking today. There's kind of this moment where it's like, oh yeah, we can do musicals on film. Right, forgot that.
And Menken is sort of deliberately. He probably wouldn't say this out loud anymore, especially now that Sondheim has passed. But there was a fairly big schism in American musicals happening sort of on that back end of the golden age, where Sondheim was writing these musicals that are not really that melodic. Like Sunday in the Park with George has awesome songs, but they're very hard to hum. You know what I mean? Like they're hard to keep the melody around. They're hard to sort of whistle to yourself as you're walking down the street. And actually, one of the years that Sunday in the Park was up for certain Tony Awards, a different musical won. And I think, as I recall, the story is that the guy that won took a shot at Sondheim. Like, well, the simple, hummable musical is still alive and well on Broadway, specifically referencing the fact that Sunday in the Park with George has this really obscure score. And I mean, Little Shop of Horrors and Sunday in the Park with George are very much contemporaries and could not be more different in music style. I mean, Little Shop is highly melodic. I would call it the melodies sort of deliberately simple, very singable. It's hard to listen to Little Shop without singing along because you catch on so quick to what the song is.
Yep, yeah, both just the nature of like the solos and the duets, but also by nature of the kind of genre and of music that it borrows from, being the 1960s, that kind of pop rock sort of vibe, just super catchy, super like so many hooks, and yeah, gets stuck in your head. I'm excited to get to talk about it because like this is a very well beloved, or at least often produced play in the American theater lexicon, especially of like regional houses and community theaters getting to do a Broadway-esque or an off-Broadway play.
Yeah, it's truly a classic of the American theater. Little Shop of Horrors has it's really cemented its place. And it had before, of course. I mean, I think the vast majority of people know what it is, even if they've never seen it. And lots and lots of people have seen it at community theaters. This is a show that high schools do a lot, colleges do a lot. It's got puppets, so it's very popular already before the fact that Broadway finally embraced this show and has done just a kick butt revival of it that started before COVID, and we're stealing from Jackson's contact section later on, but
how dare you?
It's back. And I mean, it's one of the shows that's been rebooted now that the pandemic has started to wane, and so they're kicking off this truly a really great revival of the musical.
Yeah, a lot of great reviews about it. I'm excited to talk about that in the context, but also just all the ways that this musical has kind of pervaded our culture. I remember like I knew Feed Me Seymour before I was like paying attention to Broadway plays. Like my parents quoted it because they like saw the movie or saw the play, and so I would run around saying the line and just knew nothing about the play itself. So it works its way into our kind of cultural language.
Absolutely. Well, we will have a great conversation about it coming up, I'm sure. Before we get there, we do want to ask everybody to consider heading on over to patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. Patreon.com/noscriptpodcast, all one word, no underscores, no hyphens. That's the easiest way to find us. What you can do over there is become a supporter of the show. We've got tremendous supporters right now, folks that have been supporting us for a long time, new supporters. These are people who are helping make No Script the podcast happen week to week. While Jackson and I love to do it, it's a delightful part of our life to get to read and discuss scripts week after week. It's not a free endeavor beyond just the time commitment that it takes to be able to put on a weekly podcast, new scripts every week. There's also a monetary cost to putting on a podcast like this that we just simply couldn't afford if it were not for the folks that support us over on Patreon. So big thanks to those of you who are doing that already. Again, you are making this possible. If you're not, please think about it. The lowest tier that you can join to become a monthly supporter is $1 a month. It's like $12 total a year. I think the vast majority of people listening to this podcast can afford that. And we really believe that at minimum, you are getting that sort of value return on the time spent with No Script. $1 a month is a great level to join at. There are higher tiers if you can afford it, if you want to support us in that way. But at that $1 a month tier, you are really contributing to making No Script happen. So again, thanks to those of you who are already doing that. If you're not, please think about it. Patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. We'll see you over there.
Yes, thank you all so much. I echo the thanks. Y'all are the best. See you at patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. And now
back to the script.
You got it. That was so close. All right. All right, jumping in. I'm just going to give you a little bit of context about this play. This play is based on a film, actually, a 1960s kind of dark film that is just like a kind of a horror drama, basically, with some like very absurd sort of comedic stuff in there too. But it's pretty much a lot of the content of the play is in that film. You have this sort of plant that's eating people and etc. But when it kind of is grabbed by Menken and Ashman and produced into the musical that we know and love, it kind of takes on a lot of the severely, or severe is the wrong word, very stark dark comedy of just like sort of hilarity in the midst of all this craziness. The musical was first produced in 1982 and at the workshop of the Players Art Foundation, WPA Theater. It ran off-Broadway at the Orpheum Theater in the Manhattan's East Village, and it stayed off-Broadway for 5 years. It had a 5-year run initially, and closed in November of 1987 after 2,209 performances. It was the third longest-running musical at the time. Interestingly, it never went on to Broadway as the kind of intimate feel of the original theater. Again, this production was kind of like, in some ways, there's kind of a romanticism around this early production. It was off Broadway the whole time. It was kind of bootstrapped together with set pieces from other musicals, and kind of had this really intimate feel. A small cast again, as well, as we'll kind of talk about once we actually get into the synopsis of it. So this sort of like really intimate feel to it birthed the kind of culture around it. 5 years of this musical running, and then it was made into a film. Now, of note of those first of the off Broadway and then eventually the West End production that happened in 1983, Ellen Greene kind of pioneered the role of Audrey. She played in that off Broadway for 5 years. She played in the West End, and then she played in the film as well. So like for a long time, people's concept of the role of Audrey was defined by Ellen Greene. As I said, the film was made, and that one starred a lot of great characters. It was directed by Frank Oz, first of all. a puppeteering master. So, of course, with the giant puppet Audrey 2, that would make a lot of sense. But also, it starred Rick Moranis as Seymour, Ellen Greene, as I said, reprising her role as Audrey. You had Steve Martin as Orrin, the dentist, as well as kind of a cameo by Bill Murray, and so lots of great kind of characters float through. Some notable changes to the script on that film. I believe it ends somewhat happily with an electrocution of Audrey 2, rather than the somewhat tragic end for Seymour that the stage production has. Then the play kind of enters into its like pervading society phase. Lots of house theater, or kind of local house theaters do it, community theaters do it, regional theaters do it. It's a great play for that because it's only got a handful of characters, I believe 7, maybe 8 if you cast interestingly. But so it's a great show for houses to do. It has oh man, there's just so many. We've got a 2003 actually Broadway, 2003 to 2004 Broadway production that is kind of rebooted. The West End does it, a UK tour in 2009. There's an Australian tour in 2016. Then 2019 is the kind of big, most recent reboot of the musical. You have Jonathan Groff playing Seymour. You have Tammy Blanchard playing Audrey, and Christian Borle playing the dentist. And that production in 2019 runs basically from like late fall 2019 right up until the pandemic ends. There's a number. There's performances as late as March 11 of 2020. So it's right up until it ends. That. Oh yes, sorry. Yeah. Right up until then, and then so then that production goes dark during the pandemic, obviously. But as Jacob said in the moments before this, it's recently seeing its return to Broadway. Jonathan Groff is no longer playing the role of Seymour. Rob McClure is, but it's in production now. You can get tickets now to go see it. So this play has lots of history, but whether you saw it in the film, saw it in your local community theaters, or in any of its various runs, it has worked its way into our theater lives, at least in America.
Yeah, boy, I think I've seen it 4 times at various levels of theater. I'm trying to think. I think I may have seen 2 college productions, but also community theater and high school. I mean, it's just this musical, in part because right, there's not a lot of swearing, there's not a lot of sex. The music is, I would say, although I'm not a highly musical person, but I would say the music's fairly easy to sing in terms of being approachable and singable by high schoolers, by college freshmen, etc. But that it has a level of engagement and character and fun that can be achieved the higher level of actors and directors in production that you get. It's also, I mean, similarly, of course, because I guess there's an interesting connection because Menken and Ashman go on to write a bunch of the Disney musicals, right? Where famously, if you do one of the Disney musicals on stage, you typically rent the costumes from like a warehouse so it all sort of looks the same. And that is very much the case with Little Shop. It's not that you have to, but the Audrey plant is like, in all of its various forms, right? It grows throughout the play. You can just like rent the Audrey plant puppet that everybody uses. And so there actually is a very consistent look across a lot of the productions of Little Shop. Not all of them, of course. I've seen some very interesting production photos as we've been researching the play, but a lot of them look very similar. Seymour's in the same kind of glasses. The shop looks very similar. The puppet is exactly the same puppet every time. And I think that's interesting because that's not the case for a lot of theater, right? Like you look up productions of any given play and the productions I think are going to look very disparate, very, imagined by the group. But Little Shop is a very consistently staged musical.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, most of the time when you get a script, you kind of try to put something new on it. But I think because of the way that, and certainly that is true of this script in certain ways, there's certain silences that different casts like to highlight, like the shock of Seymour the first time the plant talks or something like that. But in a play that kind of deals a little bit in nostalgia with this, 1960s vibe and music, the kind of distinguishedness, especially of Audrey 2 as like it's kind of Audrey 2 in its 4 stages of growth is just like a consistent theme throughout, and it makes a lot of sense that there's like a rental agency to like kind of keep that running.
Yeah, and like there are some interesting plants out there in the productions, but for the most part, everybody's using like that same plant puppet
Yep.
across all of them. That's just interesting to me. Okay, so Little Shop of Horrors takes place in a neighborhood called Skid Row, right? This is a neighborhood of Los Angeles, and at the time that the play takes place, it's a fairly rough neighborhood. It's like downtown LA. It's really impoverished. It's really dirty. The play describes that there are, sort of alcoholics collapsed and littering the stage in the neighborhood everywhere. The trash doesn't get taken care of. And in this neighborhood is a little florist shop run by Mr. Mushnick, and he has two employees, Seymour, who is an orphan that Mushnick has taken in and taken advantage of, for sure. Seymour is made to work almost all the time to kind of be able to have his very minimal room and board with Mushnick. Seymour is sort of awkward, sort of nerdy, very interested in plants, very goofy, and very clumsy, and that annoys Mushnick. The other employee is named Audrey. Audrey and Seymour are very much attracted to each other, but circumstances are keeping them apart. One of those circumstances is that Audrey is dating an abusive partner named Orrin. Orrin is, as you learn in a very funny song later in the play, a dentist, so makes a fair amount of money, but is a sadist. I mean, enjoys inflicting pain and torture. That's why he became a dentist in the great song. It's just called Dentist, but I call it Son Be a Dentist, which is the song where he describes his mother telling him as a child when he was displaying these sadist, torturing tendencies that he should grow up to be a dentist. He'd be very successful at that. Takes a little bit of a pot shot at dentists, for sure.
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
So Audrey's dating this abusive boyfriend, Orrin. She comes in with a broken arm at one point with a black eye. I mean, very clearly he's abusing her. The play really takes off when Mushnick decides he's going to have to close down the flower shop because they don't get any customers. I mean, it's a florist shop in Skid Row, so nobody comes in. And in an effort to save the shop, Audrey and Seymour convince Mushnick that they should allow him to put Seymour's new plant discovery in the window. This plant is a kind of plant that Seymour's never seen before. Seymour's sort of an amateur botanist, so it does seem to be a new plant of some sort. He discovered it in a neighborhood while he was searching for exotic plants during a total eclipse of the sun. This mysterious, otherworldly event that brought this plant into his life. He's named the plant, because it's a new species, Audrey 2. That will go on to be the plant's name throughout the course of the show. And this plant is sort of an alien Venus flytrap, is sort of what you could imagine. Now, I've seen some sort of different things that don't quite look so flytrap-ish used, but the famous puppet growth thing that's used in a lot of the productions basically looks like a Venus flytrap with big viney thorns, or big thorny vines, rather. And so that's sort of what you could imagine, and typically it has lipstick on it, or it, like the coloring of the leaves around the mouth is such that it looks like lipstick. So it's sort of, big comedic, kind of otherworldly. And Audrey 2 is immediately a success. And so it immediately starts attracting people in because it is a new plant, and they immediately start selling flowers like crazy. And so Mushnick believes that this is sort of the thing that saved him. Seymour is the thing that saves him. There's some great, really fun numbers both at the top of Act 2 and early in Act 1 as the flower shop is being restored and brought back to life. The only thing is that this flower, this new exotic species of plant, doesn't eat traditional plant food. In fact, Seymour's struggling to keep it alive until he discovers that what it does eat, and a lot of people know the musical, so this is no surprise, is blood. Fresh human blood keeps it alive. And so for a while, Seymour keeps it alive by small cuts on his own hands and arms and feeds it the blood. And as he feeds it blood, this plant grows and grows. It grows from a small potted flytrap thing to this sort of almost human-sized manipulatable puppet to this plant that takes over the stage to eventually it really does. It's in this enormous puppet thing that fills the whole stage with vines and thorns. So it really grows enormously throughout the show, and that's why how you handle the Audrey 2 puppet is really going to define a lot of your production. What is it going to look like? How is it going to grow? How is it going to become more menacing throughout the play? Eventually, it's such a success. Seymour is getting interviews with radio shows. He's becoming sort of a famous character in and of himself. He's getting paid a bunch. Mushnick decides that, hey, I really need Seymour to keep my flower shop alive, so I'm going to adopt you, and a sort of manipulating their relationship and Seymour's reliance on him to keep Seymour around. And then the plant demands enough blood that Seymour can no longer keep up with the output. It's grown to an enormous size. Seymour, cutting his own hands and arms, is not going to be able to feed it enough blood. So there is a great song, Feed Me, Seymour. It's the song, if you know it. And in the song, the plant Audrey 2 basically makes the case that you're going to have to go kill someone and feed me the body over a long, you can parcel it out so that it feeds me for a while. But that's basically the only way forward. Well, of course, Seymour is not pleased about that. He's not an inherently evil human being. He doesn't really want to kill somebody to feed him to a plant. The plant tries a bunch of different tactics trying to convince Seymour of all the different things it can give him, fame and money and cars and all of this stuff. And eventually, of course, Audrey, the human, the plant says will, fall in love with him and want to be with him. And all of this is, it's tempting to Seymour, but maybe not pushing him over the edge. But what eventually does is that Seymour sees Oren physically abusing Audrey sort of through the shop window, hitting her and calling her a slut and all of this stuff. And in one of the great lines of the musical, the plant sings, "That guy sure looks like plant food to me." And so Seymour makes his decision. He's going to kill Oren, the dentist, Audrey's abusive boyfriend, as a way to protect Audrey and also as a way to get the food for the plant. So Seymour goes to the dentist. This sadistic, evil dentist is going to strap him to the chair and do all this terrible stuff to his mouth as Seymour's deciding whether or not to kill him. Seymour's got a gun, and eventually Seymour decides, I can't do it. I can't shoot him dead. And at that moment, Oren, the dentist, who's addicted to like his own laughing gas, suffocates on his laughing gas, and Seymour doesn't save him. And that's how the first death happens. Seymour takes the body back to the plant and starts to feed it out over a number of days. That's end of Act 1. The first murder, the first feeding the plant a whole human body. You can imagine how big the plant is at this point to be able to devour whole humans. The plant keeps getting bigger, both in fame and in what it's offering Seymour in terms of money and affluence, and prestige, and also in terms of its size. Mushnick eventually decides or figures out what's gone on. He's called into the police because there's a Mushnick florist sort of thing left at the dentist office, so that tips him off, and then he sees that Seymour and Audrey do eventually get together. With Oren out of the picture, mysteriously vanished, Audrey and Seymour have a lovely ballad, Suddenly Seymour, where they realize their affections for each other and they kiss. Mushnick sees that and realizes Seymour probably killed the dentist. He doesn't yet know about the plant, but he knows that the dentist mysteriously disappeared. Seymour's hat was left at the dentist's office. He's seen blood on the floor of the shop, and he finds the dentist uniform in the trash can outside the shop. He puts it all together. He's going to go to the police, and Seymour feeds Mushnick to the plant whole. Now we're no longer feeding individual body parts and blood. We're feeding whole humans to the plant. So he feeds Mushnick to the plant in order to keep keep it down, keep the secret. Now he's starting to get more and more offers. The actor playing Oren comes back as a number of different there's a book tour, there's a TV show, there's the cover of Life, all these different sort of agents who want to put him up front and personal in the world. And at that time, Audrey comes back and sort of through an accident ends up getting eaten by the plant herself. Seymour has decided to kill the plant, notably. He's decided he's not going to take this fame and fortune. He needs to end this plant instead of doing all that. Great choice, Seymour. Unfortunately, while he's out of the shop, Audrey, by accident, puts herself in a position to be consumed by the plant. Seymour rushes in just as it's happening and manages to pull her from being swallowed whole by the plant, but she's so injured that she passes away. And in her dying song, she asks Seymour to feed her her to the plant so that she can be part of his life forever, be part of the thing that's bringing him so much fame and fortune. So after she's passed, Seymour feeds her body to the plant. At that point, another opportunity comes along. A scientist comes and says, or a marketer, some sort of business person comes along and says, we're going to take cuttings of Audrey 2. We'll pay you a bunch of money, and we'll take cuttings of Audrey 2 and send them all over the world. Everybody can have their own Audrey 2. And Seymour realizes, this was your plan. You're going to take over the world, aren't you? And he tries to kill the plant through a variety of means. Nothing works. So he finally grabs a machete and hops into the plant to try to stab it from the inside. But Audrey 2 swallows him whole and spits out the machete. And in the song's final conclusion, the Audrey 2 cuttings are taken, sent all over the world, and the ensemble sings the sort of big moral lesson: don't feed the plants. As Audrey, we get these sort of news updates from the chorus that the Audrey 2s are indeed taking over the world and eating human beings whole. And that is the end of Little Shop of Horrors.
There you go. Yeah. So yeah, it's a delightful, comedic, dark romp through some pretty big themes. We're gonna get into kind of our normal thing, almost certainly, that we do, where we talk about like big themes and character arcs and stuff like that. But it's worth noting, I think, at the start of this one, because normally we do this at the end where we realize, oh, we didn't talk at all about like how funny and goofy it is. This musical like demands that you laugh at some like really dark themes. You're feeding people to a plant. And like and yet the way that these characters embody themselves kind of draw that laugh out of you, whether it's through the songs and the kind of absurdity of it and just the way that the melodies work, or the just sort of odd juxtaposition that they're put in of this living plant talking to them. There's just so many moments where a laugh is kind of pulled out of you, even in the midst of like some pretty shocking themes.
Yeah, well, it's just hilarious. I mean, the characters are so big and exaggerated. I mean, it certainly feels like an older genre of material that you're engaging, where the exaggerated characters are unrealistic. I mean, the dentist character, right? Oren is this horrible sadist dentist who's proud of it and is singing these big, crazy numbers. Seymour is like almost unbelievably goofy and clumsy and awkward. And Audrey is this sort of, honestly, sort of a sexist is picture of this sort of abused woman with a heart of gold that falls in love with the main character. And so I think immediately your instinct is to sort of say, oh, this is odd and exaggerated, but you just fall into the way the characters talk and sing to each other and the driving score and how quick the action moves, that it overwhelms you, and you just end up enjoying the fact that we're living in this heightened world. And in this heightened reality, plants talk and characters do things that are exaggerated but also hilarious. And the writing of the book to the music, the lyrics, is so good that it just pulls you in this sort of strange way that truly has defined Little Shop's success.
Yeah, there's some pretty significant underpinnings of this play that like allow it to do that. You have the sort of archetypal, almost like commedia dell'arte, sort of like character types of these people. And yes, some of them are dated, and that's a issue that the play has been trying to work on. Even as recently as the 2019 production. The role that Ellen Greene kind of premiered as Audrey kind of didn't hit the same way. So Tammy Blanchard did some things with the role, and I imagine she's continuing to kind of continue with it and adapt it. But even so, the dentist being that reprehensible of a person is a necessary archetype to be the foil for that, because he needs to be the first one that justifies Seymour killing, because Seymour is not a killer, really. In that first scene, especially, even the multiple times that people end up dying, he doesn't like push them in necessarily, but he does allow this horrible person of the dentist to die. at his own hand, essentially. He doesn't save him. He doesn't push Mushnik in, but he says that he put all the money from the cash register inside of Audrey, and kind of relying on Mushnik's greed to kind of pull him into the plan. So you have these you need these archetypes in order to kind of push Seymour further along this path of depravity, I don't know, of murder that the plant is like pulling him into.
Yeah, well, and it's the way that the show plays with these, I would almost call them American archetypes, that really works, right? This, for example, the jerk abusive boyfriend, right, is a overwhelmingly reoccurring character. And what does the musical do with it? They turn it into a way to make fun of dentists. I mean, it just that additional little twist to bring a sort of comic perspective, a little extra layer, just to make it something where the character is not just this thing that we've seen before, yes, but also this sort of everything about it is terrible, and everything about Oren is terrible. But the musical finds a way for us to laugh at it, honestly. And it's our ability to laugh at it, or Seymour the same way, right? This nerd, this awkward goofball character. What does he end up having to do? Kill people. I mean, the awkward nerd, goofball doesn't like put on some new outfits and go to the prom and get the girl like in every other teenage romantic whatever. He has to kill people to get his fame and fortune. So it's the slight twists on not what is expected, but on these sort of models for characters and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, and in that way, it kind of relies again on a very old thing. This kind of like, what would you do to change your situation? And then what would you do to hold on to your situation once you have changed it? And that way, a lot of people have compared this to the Faustian myth of Faust kind of making a deal with Mephistopheles to get more fame, more power, and then what the lengths that Mephistopheles pushes Faustus to go to hold on to it. It's very similar. It's a kind of a new twist on that kind of old myth of like, yes, what if there was a way for you to, what if you could change your fate? What if you could like what if you could like in a day switch everything about the bad things about your life that you don't like, and get rid of awful people, because surely they're more awful than you. But then like the reality of the lengths that you would go to hang on to it makes you realize, oh no, what if I am that awful? It's a kind of a classic, almost parabolic tale.
Yeah, well, I think the other sort of more ancient structure that you could look for in Little Shop of Horrors is like a Greek tragedy.
Yeah,
I mean, very much, right? This play has a chorus, a trio of these singers that sort of parade throughout the show, and they serve in a very interesting way as the chorus, in the sense that they are characters in some of the scenes, sort of observers who live on Skid Row. They help advertise the flower. They talk with the characters as characters, but then they also serve a sort of otherworldly role of commentating on the action. They sing backup for the flower, which does not make any sense for them. It never seems to be that the characters that these three chorus play in the dialogue, they don't seem to know about the flower killing, but they're the backup singers for Audrey too. So they serve this sort of dual role of observer and commentator, like a Greek chorus does. Seymour, as a sort of Greek tragic hero, right, takes on this one thing that collapses not only his life, but the life of everyone around him. The tragic consequences befall the people that he loves, and then, of course, finally him at the end.
Yeah, the kind of his own the manifestation of his greed, or the manifestation of his choices, is what consumes him in the end. And yeah, no, absolutely, the kind of like etherealness. I love the chorus of Chiffon, Crystal, and Ronette that just kind of float through the different scenes. Will pop in a lot of times to really comedic effectiveness. Will pop into a scene as like backup singers on the theme of whatever the song is about. But the way that they move through it kind of definitely brings in those sort of like classic Greek themes. Perhaps in the stage version, at least, the world isn't necessarily better off at the end when the tragic hero goes away, because now the world is filled with Audrey 2s. But you do kind of get a very comedic version of catharsis at the end. You have the kind of pity and fear of like, what would you do if you could like, have your one big break, but it meant having to do some of these sorts of things. The kind of final song has like, there's so many jerks around the world who are willing to feed these like little Audrey 2s blood, so don't feed the plants. So it's kind of calling to mind that sort of pity fear warning about like what would you do if you could do this.
And that warning at the end of the play, don't feed the plants, I just find it so effective because it's simultaneously really on the nose. Right. I mean, it's not subtle in the sense that it's very much, clearly a commentary on what Seymour did throughout the play. But at the same time, it doesn't come right out and say it, right? There's no interpretation for the sake of the audience where the characters sing about how, the plants are really a metaphor for fame and money and getting the things that you want. And when you feed them with the pain and suffering of, whatever, however you want to describe the theme of the musical. There's lots of variations on that idea. What are you willing to sacrifice for what you really want out of life and things like that? So they don't come out and explain it. So it's at once not subtle at all in the way that the rest of the musical is. Nothing about this musical is subtle. So it's not subtle at all, so it fits in the world of the musical. And at the same time, it has an additional layer that is, for the moment after the play.
Yeah, it doesn't like lock in one specific thing, which allows it to play in a lot of different decades, right? So like when like the story at least starts in the 1960s with this sort of film that's done that has a lot of kind of fear. 1960s, a lot of fear about like scientific advancement and what everyone is experimenting on. So the kind of danger of science, let to run loose. What sort of terrible things could happen if we let that happen? And I imagine now a more compelling question is like, what happens when you get your big break? What do you get when you get like instantly famous, and how to hold on to that? That would be a theme that's really prevalent now. Same sort of plot, same sort of kind of core elements, but vastly different applications that can kind of survive more cultural moments, at least within the context of a capitalist society where that kind of question is always asked, like, what if I make it big? What if I succeed tomorrow? And so it keeps being able to speak into that culture no matter the decade.
Yeah, well, and it both of the characters that are kind of at the center of it all, Audrey and Seymour, get their I Want song, right? Musicals like this, and a lot of the Disney musicals that Menken goes on to write, are what have really crystallized the kind of classic musical structure. The world establishing song, the I Want song, the big choice for the character at the end of Act 1. I mean, these are all things that like are classic musical structure. And the I Want song in this musical is the big number about Skid Row, down on Skid Row. And both Audrey and Seymour sort of sing about this escapist, if I could only get out of here, to get out of Skid Row, right? And the idea of leaving their circumstances behind, these things that are trapping them in this place where, for Audrey, the only people that I can be in relationship with are people that hurt me. For Seymour, right? I was left by my parents. I don't have any real familial connections except for this guy who takes advantage of me and makes me work all the time in order to pay my bills. And if I could only escape these circumstances, my life would be better. And I think what's interesting is that the Audrey 2 plant, what it offers to Seymour and through Seymour to Audrey, is not an escape from Skid Row. I wonder if there is a level to which this musical is also partly about what it is to get things in the short term that are satisfying but are not what you ultimately need, question mark. But I just think
Hmm.
it's interesting that the plant isn't like, hey, we should go tour the world and get you out of here, and we're gonna go find a different shop. And in fact, the opportunity comes around that Seymour could potentially take this plant to a bigger shop, or somebody mentions him that, and get out of Skid Row, literally. And immediately Mushnick swoops in and retraps him back through this manipulative father-son relationship song, Mushnick and Son. So it's they don't get out of Skid Row, right? I mean, literally, despite all the things that Seymour has offered, and through Seymour Audrey, the thing that they sing about in the I Want song to get out of Skid Row is not one of those things that happens for them.
Yeah, and that's pretty consistent across all of the characters. Like, if you think of the four characters, they all kind of have an I want. They all kind of have, like, I agree that Audrey and Seymour kind of have the two biggest ones and the ones that we focus on the most. But Mushnick wants to, like, be successful and not have to worry about not have to worry about bankruptcy anymore. Oren has problems and wants bad things, and he doesn't get them. But yeah, consistently the kind of net that is, or the web really that is weaved by Audrey 2 denies them things while kind of promising, but never fully coming through on the ultimate dream. And that way, it's kind of like, again, another archetype of the devil at the crossroads sort of thing, where you get something that you think you want, that you think is going to lead you to the thing that you ultimately want, but it's at the cost of something much greater, and for you to never reach that end goal. So you have that sort of like consequences of feeling good for a little bit versus the possible future, and the sort of good things in the future.
Yeah, and this really oppressive environment that the play sets them amidst is almost an antagonist in and of itself. I
Ooh,
mean,
yeah.
this play is sort of odd in that, like, who is Seymour fighting against? It's Seymour makes some decisions across the course of the play. Largely, they're decisions to first to not save the dentist by way that of course it really is his way of murdering him, and then by tricking Mushnick into joining the plant. And then I think another crucial decision is to feed Audrey's body to the plant. And then in that moment, I think he decides to continue to let the plant be alive, only until his mind is changed again by the fact that the plant is going to spread all over the world and take over humanity, and blah 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 blah, right? But it's interesting that a lot of those decisions are not made in pushing against another person, right? It's what Seymour's goal is. What exactly? It's a little nebulous to me. He's a little reactive to me of a character for a sort of traditional protagonist.
Yeah, definitely. He's definitely taken advantage, like easy to be taken advantage of by Audrey too. And I think partially that's due to his, like, a lot of times the choices that he's trying to make are to try to because he loves Audrey. Not Audrey too. So you have these multiple times kind of later on, especially I think it's like Act 2-ish area, where the sort of ramifications are starting to kind of land home, and the choices that he's getting are tied to his ability to continue to keep Audrey 2 alive. The question is, will Audrey still like me if I don't have this success? That of course is like kind of there is a moment where he manages to ask her that question, and it just comes a little too late, because she says, yes, of course I'd like you if that never happened, and then he kind of reveals the lengths to which he went to kind of accomplish what has come to. And so you again get that sort of tragic, like getting, like, what you think it takes to get what you want ends up making the thing that you want inaccessible to you. To the point that the thing that you have to do removes removes Audrey from the equation. The thing that keeping Audrey 2 alive kills Audrey. So it's this, again, a beautiful sort of tragic net that gets put around Seymour, who I agree doesn't have the sort of heroic strength of a Creon or something like that.
And
But
I do think that that's intentional, and it's intentional all the way back to the original Little Shop of Horrors horror movie. There's a great quote from the guy who created that original Little Shop of Horrors, and it was originally going to be about a vampire, and things kept changing. And he's this famous B movie horror director, and he has he says in an interview a real opposition to the sort of traditional hero, this sort of take action, brave, step in, change the world, fight the bad guy sort of hero. And his opposition to that produces a quote unquote hero like Seymour. And I think Seymour's almost an anti-hero. And I don't mean that in the way that we traditionally mean that, where he's like, he is the villain that is
but you
also,
like
although
him.
To be honest, he is killing people, so that kind of works. But what I really mean is that he's like the opposite of a traditional hero. He's weak. He's a klutz. He doesn't ever really make a big decision to get. It's all in the moment. Like, what am I gonna do? Really, the most heroic decision he makes, I think, is to save Audrey from her abusive boyfriend by going to kill him. But then he doesn't do it.
He doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't do it.
So he's this sort of odd hero for us to follow. And truthfully, it gets a little hard in the musical to wrap your arms around Seymour as the character that you're really following and rooting for, because all of the decisions that you'd sort of hope to root for that he has to make are like decisions that you're like, I don't know, man. You really want to kill them and feed them to a plant?
Yep. Yeah, no, it's kind of, I think, deliberately blown up to crazy proportions, where it's like, I could never imagine myself doing that. But which is interesting, because like I think, I don't know, these last two plays, it's interesting to think about the two plays together that we've talked about, A Sunday in the Park with George and Little Shop, because they're both kind of have these themes of what artists need to do to survive. A lot, a number of these, it's easy to wonder if some of these playwrights are kind of working out some of the angst from having come up and trying to make it in theater, because there's this question of how hard do you push before you lose yourself. And both of them, George, the later on George from Sunday in the Park with George is like pushing himself, trying to make connections, so much so that he can't do his art. Seymour is pushing himself to try to keep this plant alive so that he can maybe get out of here, so that he can maybe have the life he wants. And yet it's all taken from him in the end. So you kind of it's interesting.
Fascinating. I truly don't know if I've ever heard that reading of Little Shop before, but I think it's an interesting one. The idea of it as a sort of metaphor for creation. And although, again, I think Menken is quite proud of his Disney musicals, it is sort of interesting. And this, of course, came before it all. But it is sort of interesting to think in terms of like his life and career, that like you sort of wonder sometimes, does he wish he had done more serious work? Although he ends up having a really profound impact on the world. I mean, the Disney musicals are as popular as anything most other playwrights and musical writers, even Sondheim, ever possibly did. But, did he feed the plant a little?
It is a question, right? And it's the question that, that pretty directly is what the musical is asking at the end. Will you, like it almost as it kind of turns the plant into an idea or a framework that is saying, this is already out there in the world. This there is something asking for you to do something in order so that the thing that you want could maybe come to you, no matter what brand of life that is. I think that's a pretty universal emotion, even though it may have sounded convoluted when I say it. This sort of like desire to get just another step further and change your circumstance is out there. And what are you gonna do? Are you gonna pay the price to the devil at the crossroads? Are you going to push for it even though it might hurt you or people around you? And the kind of plea that it says is, don't do that. Don't feed the plant.
Well, and both of the decisions I think that he has to make along that road, or the first two at least, are I think they are more the way that the decision comes about is more relatable than the plant story, right? I mean, I think you said earlier, like, it's hard to imagine me ever doing that, like feeding people to a plant, and that's part of the story, right? Is this totally unimaginable circumstance that at its core has these sort of little things that kind of reach out, right? So he doesn't want to murder somebody to feed him to a plant, right? But then he sees the girl that he loves being beaten up by her jerk abusive boyfriend, and he decides, I could maybe be a hero in that circumstance and get what I want. And then it ends up that he's able to just sort of hold his hands up and say, well, I didn't save him. Does that mean I murdered him? And then when Mushnik is going to turn him over, right? It's one of those things that all happens so fast. The decision has to happen so fast. It's never like along the way he's like, I'm going to become a guy who feeds people to plants to get what I want. It's a series of little decisions that he makes that are, again, I think sort of reactive for a protagonist character, but their reactiveness is part of the story, I think, where it's like he never makes an active forward decision to become the plant, feeding murderer. But in these series of small reactive decisions, he ends up being that.
Yeah, and in that way, even as the circumstances are blown out of proportion, to the astute person, who's there to kind of let theater both delight and instruct you. This play kind of asks the questions like, have you already made those choices? Are you already kind of like just the little tiny bit of difference? Because yes, the ridiculousness of feeding someone to the plant is like never would do that. But if you actually took a second and think, there's someone in the whole globe that you're like, the world would be a little better if I fed that person to a plant. So it kind of makes like it brings it just that little tiny bit closer. The absurdity allows the space to ask a sort of interesting question of yourself and what to guard against, what you're capable of.
And I think you're right, totally right. It's the absurdity that helps it all, because we're not expecting these characters, I don't think, to make realistic choices. I think they make earned choices in the context of the absurdity of the show. I'm not saying I don't think their choices are earned, but they're not like human choices. I think that Menken and Ashman would probably be mad at me for saying that, but I just mean that they're not. The choices that the characters make in the show are part of the exaggerated world of the play, and because of that, we buy in. And I think it's only when you sort of take that 1,000-foot view at dinner afterwards or whatever, where you realize there's something parabolic about the play, about the feeding of your secret inner wants, and the expense that might have on the world around you.
This has been the conversation pretty much. This is a great play for those conversations. This in some ways this was the afterwards opera going out to get a drink and talk about the show. It's a great show for that, because you have a great time while you're there, and then you leave and you're like, oh, themes, and can kind of dwell in the play a little bit longer. Fortunately, this conversation doesn't have to stop, even though we're out of time. We'd love to keep talking about Little Shop of Horrors with you. Now listen, oftentimes I will say, maybe some of you have been in this play or seen this play or whatever, and I'm like, there's no way anyone's ever seen or been in this play. Just because of either the obscurity of the play or because it's a new play on Broadway or something like that. But this play, I guarantee that there's at least 30 of you who have seen this play or have been in this play and have read this play or just interacted with it in some way. It's a great show. We'd love to keep talking with you all out there in the social media realm. We're on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the username @NoScriptPodcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of those sites. We'd love to keep talking about Little Shop of Horrors with you.
Absolutely. If you've liked this episode or any of our other episodes, you can pass this podcast on to your family and friends. Tell them about the show. Tell them about an episode you liked, a script you know they like. If you know folks that like theater, that like plays, reading, whatever, stories, this is a great show for them. Send them our way. We're so appreciative. You can send them to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Podbeam, where we're hosted, and also YouTube now. We are up on YouTube. You can find us there. Just search No Script the Podcast.
And we're slowly getting the kind of lexicon of all of our previous podcasts up onto YouTube, so eventually be able to access all of the shows there. So keep an eye out for that if that is your platform of choice, and keep an eye out for next week when we're talking about another script. Until then, I am Jackson Nikolai.
I'm Jacob Mann Christensen. Thanks for joining us for No Script the Podcast.